Hello, and thank you for folks who are sticking around to the last talk. I really appreciate that, and I'm delighted to tell you about an active adaptation reforestation project at the Stossel Creek location, which is in the Toll watershed along the foothills of the Cascade Mountains in western Washington. So think of this as a case study where we accepted change and directed it, and in the RAD framework that we discussed this morning. So my name is Ronda Strauch, and I work at Seattle City Light as a municipal electric utility. And I help them, the utility, prepare for climate change. And part of our business is to help restore habitat for declining species, including purchasing the land that are in our watersheds that we don't own, to purchase those to help restore the land for habitat for declining species, such as salmon. And this is includes the watersheds that we have our hydropower and also Seattle's drinking water, and restoring these to be resilient today and into the future. So let me tell you a little about Stossel Creek. Make sure this is not over there. Okay, so Stossel Creek is going through our site. So we call it Stossel Creek because of that. We purchased 154 acres in 2017 that happened to be partially harvested in 2012. The parcel is located in a watershed that provides water for drinking water and hydropower, and habitat for steelhead and salmon. So you see there on the right, that's the parcel that was logged that we now own. So we wanted to reforest this parcel, and we partnered with several entities to receive a grant to help us do this. This grant was from the Wildlife Conservation Society as part of a climate adaptation fund established by a grant from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. And we combined this with our own resources to implement this project. So when we were thinking of our approach to reforesting this site, we didn't want it to follow our traditional approach. This is because we knew climate is changing and traditional approaches might not get us to our ultimate goal. So we needed to manage for change, as another speaker had mentioned. So at this location in western Washington, I'm not going to read the whole slide here, the climate is basically projected to be similar to southwestern Oregon by the end of the century. And the trees we plant would be growing up in this evolving climate. So the warmer temperatures and the reduced summer precipitation was projected may cause drought stress for our native trees that we would plant that are adapted to a colder, wetter conditions, such as Douglas fir. So we ultimately wanted at this location was to establish a mature, diverse, and both biodiversity and also structural diversity forest that continues to provide critical ecosystem functions into the next century without the need for future interventions like watering. So we wanted to increase the forest functional redundancy as well, meaning resiliency that comes from multiple species, from different taxonomic groups and genotypes, but how do we do this in a changing world? So we set our objective to test assisted migration of genotypes, so range expansion, and species migration by moving seeds and trees sourced from a warmer, drier climate, as well as planting our locally sourced trees like we would traditionally do. So to select what seed sources to use, we use the seed lot selection tool, which was created through a collaboration between the U.S. Forest Service, Oregon State University, and the Conservation Biology Institute, as Tom had described this earlier this morning. So a reminder that this tool helps forest managers match seed lots with planting sites based on climate information. So we found by using this tool that Douglas fir and western red cedar sourced from the coastal area of Oregon would be adapted to the local climate 20 to 30 years from now, and then trees sourced from southern Oregon and northern California are adapted to the climate projected for later in this century. So this sort of gave us our planting plan. So here was our test. We planted first we had the non-assisted migration. So we planted Douglas fir, western red cedar, grand fir and shore pine. And the shore pine and grand fir, they weren't actually on the site, but they're known to be like in the area. So then we also planted species that were considered seed migration. So these were Douglas fir from Oregon and Douglas fir from California and Western red cedar from Oregon. And then we also planted some range expansion species, Gary oak and Western white pine. And then finally, one species, a species that would be considered species migration, incense cedar from California. And we didn't originally plan on doing this, but we kind of struggled to find Western red cedar from Northern California. So we chose incense cedar instead. Part of the challenges of doing these projects is actually getting your nurseries and getting your species, your trees. So this describes our planting approach. We did a plant inventory so we can understand what was already on the site. It's 2017, and then we divided into planting zones. The idea was here we wanted to preserve areas that weren't cut and then also natural regenerating areas. And so we also completed a cultural resource survey because we were just doing some ground disturbances. We did treat invasives, and I know this is an invasive conference, so we did try to get rid of them, although it wasn't, overly infested. So we included treating Japanese knotweed, and we had Himalayan and evergreen blackberry, tansy ragwort, Scotch broom, and others. So we then planted trees in clumps, and then also in our trial plots that we could monitor. And so we ended up planting over 14,000 trees in March of last year. And then we also protected some of the plants in our planting trials and on others with extra tubing. So this gives you an idea of the site, and there's our planting zones. And then these purple rectangles were the trial plots we established. So there were 6 of these, 150 seedlings in each of those plots. And they represent all 10 species or sources in a randomly assigned rows of 15 plants. And so we have these trials consist of 2 blocks with 3 replicates in each to represent 2 dominant soil types: gravelly sandy loam, glacial drift, and then a gravelly medium loam glacial drift. So the ones on the left are block 1, and it's a flatter area with some late afternoon shade from that forest you see on the west. And then the plot on the right is on a southwest facing slope with greater exposure. So it kind of just gives you the setting. So we didn't just plant and walk away. We will be monitoring the trial plots over the next 5 years at least, recording things like height, mortality, vigor, and this is these 4 categories. So vigor was a % of live leaf tissue, and then any damage. And then we also have been taking, we have photo points established. Oh, so how are things going? So the first monitoring was done 7 months after planting. This is in September of last year. And so it's early to glean too much at this point. But what we did see was that the pines are doing well. In general, the Douglas fir from Oregon and California had the highest survival rate, while Gary oak had the highest vigor rate. Western red cedar from Oregon and from Washington, Oregon, both had the lowest survival and vigor. And then the block 2 that was on that more exposed site had the lower survival rate. And so we think that's part of the soils and drainage and the more exposed conditions. And so as I think of climate and seedling establishment is vulnerable to, it's a vulnerable life stage. So I thought people would be interested in looking at the weather around the time we planted and since. So this figure shows precipitation at the top, like it's raining, and then the temperature at the bottom with a rolling average from 14 previous days. And the time on the x-axis is going from January of 2020 to August of 2021. I'm just checking my time. And so we planted in late February, early March, just like we knew COVID was coming. Boy, did we just squeak that in. Going into the planting, we had, you could see good precipitation, so we had wet conditions. We had some rain during the planting, and then 2 weeks after we had like a dry spell. We had a relatively wet April and June, a few rain events during July and August, but not much until September. Our warmest period last year was in late July with a warm peak of in August of 81 degrees Fahrenheit. So then we move into, there's a dashed line that transitions to 2021. We had little precipitation since June this year, and peak temperatures in June 28th. And that was that heat dome people heard about. So panic, did we just fry all of our trees? So let's see, I look at some photos. Here is a broad shot of block 1, rep 2. So this is the ones that were on the left. The photo on the left is September of last year. The one on the right is from this year. Yes, my panic caused me to convince my husband that we need to go for an evening bike ride to check this site out before today's talk. So you can see that there's a lot of competing native vegetation, which is why we actually cleared 3 feet last year around the trials trees. So this is like what Abe was talking about, shrubs can be very competitive. But let's zoom in a little bit closer. Ha, they are not all fried. Whew, was I relieved. So the trees actually look great. I am shocked, although some were dead, but most looked good. And this is all species. So some are doing better than others, but there was definitely surviving ones of all species. These pictures are from last week. So our partners will be going out to do the official monitoring, probably out there right now. So we'll be documenting the official health of from these trials, not my bike ride visit. So communication was another big part of this project, and we had held a workshop during the planting last year and shared what we were doing with restoration practitioners and private foresters. King 5 News has come out and covered this project twice. So we have good documentation that has been put together by our partners and is available at these websites, and I will put this in the chat. And we're running out of time, and that is where I was going to end. Thank you, and happy to take any questions if we have time. I'll put this in.
We do have time. That was great, Rhonda. Thank you so much. And thanks for going for a quick bike ride to come up with an updated picture.
Thank God they're alive.
It's a good picture. I liked it. I like all the pictures everyone has shown over the last couple of days. So we do have a question directly for you. Are there plans to replicate the planting in other sites within the watershed?
Not at this time, but I think when we get to the opportunity where we have a disturbed site, you're talking about this particular watershed within the same watershed.
Within, yeah.
Is that what they're saying? Within. So we have other lands up in the Skagit, and so in this picture you can see the gal on the left. That's Denise Cranwell. She's one that runs our purchasing of lands for restoration, and so she's very aware of this technique. So I could see her if she has an opportunity to do this again. I would no doubt that she would ask or would try to do that and get funding to support that. But we don't have anything like already planned.
And another question, are there opportunities for newer scientists to get involved or potential for graduate students to be involved for thesis purposes?
Oh, I would welcome that. Denise would as well. So yeah, absolutely. We can get folks out here. The site has been buttoned up and is protected. The road has been sort of blocked, so we can't get HDTVs up here running around anymore. So it's recovering, and we are on the hook for 5 years of data that we're supporting Mountains to Sound Greenway to do that work. And but we'd like to look more long term. Like, how is this going to be looking 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line? So like a professor wants to take on a long-term research project and bring graduate students here to, every year to collect some data and then carry it through would be awesome. So please reach out.
That's a good pitch.
Yeah.
And then another question for you, what has been the general or public response to planting species and genotypes from far away? Do people get non-stationarity and the need to think this way?
I was thinking about, I was told you about King 5 came out and did a couple news stories on this, and we had nothing but positive feedback. This is so exciting. You guys are actually doing this. So we haven't had people really concerned about, are we bringing like invasive species in, like bringing incense cedar all the way up, incense cedar up here? Maybe if you were doing it at a much broader scale, it might be more of a concern, but we planted 51 of the 154 acres. And so it's still a relatively small area. So if we really felt that there was some concern here, you could always go in and take out the particular, like incense cedar, if you didn't want that to be here. But we haven't had folks, concerned about that. We've had a few folks bring up, more scientist folks, concerns about, did we bring in particular, mycorrhiza or other kind of, or diseases or pests or something like that. So that's something I think that we'll be keeping an eye on. And there's an opportunity for a graduate student or a researcher to take on to see, did we bring anything here that we didn't want to?
And then another question, is there another tour coming up, like the one in your question slide?
We have nothing scheduled, but I mean, we could always work something out like that too, for sure, if people want to do. And that I might talk to our partners again and see maybe we should do this, not this year, but next year when COVID is sort of settling down, and open it up for folks to get back.
Hopefully, yeah.
See what it looks like.
Yeah. Another question for you, is there a chance that these species will outcompete the natives at a faster rate than climate change will have this occur?
And well, that's what we're going to find out in our trial, because we did plant the natives. So like Douglas fir from a local seed source are in those trial plots. So that is partly, to see whether the ones from Oregon and Doug fir from, I think we had one in Oregon and California, are they going to outcompete? Are they going to do better? I don't think it's going to get, to the point where it's too much. I'm not worried about that. I mean, these are planted at close spacings, and even then we're, long term, we may have to thin these. Everybody survives, which they all won't. It's almost too close. They're too close to spacing. You can see them right there. That's, trees growing, big trees. Look how close those vex are. You can't have them growing that close.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much, Rhonda.